Hey everyone, welcome to the Worn Shoes Podcast. My name is Zachary, and I interview people that have grown up around the world and learned the extraordinary in their everyday lives. Today I'm talking with Jessi, who grew up in England and Turkey. We talk about her connection to each culture, tea, and how her experiences pushed her to work with third culture kids and what she's doing now. Stick around to the end of the episode for a preview of what's next. I hope that you enjoy our conversation. Hey Jessi, welcome to the Worn Shoes Podcast. How are you doing today?
Hey, doing great. Happy to be here.
Awesome, happy to have you. To start off, we'll start off with an easy question. But what does the word home mean to you, and what are some of the places that you would consider to be home?
I love that you said we're starting on an easy question because, like, for TCKs, that can be notoriously hard.
hmm
Yeah, it's oh man, the word home. I feel like it's shifted. I was just talking to someone the other day about this, that I don't know that I see home as much of a place as maybe monoculturals do, as much as a feeling of peace.
Hmm.
Because even when I talk about visiting host cultures when I was a kid, or talking to adult TCKs who have gone back to visit their places, they're like, there's this sense of home, even though I don't want to live here again, or I have a place that I live in now that I enjoy. And I'm like, I think it's this sense of peace. Because even as a kid, I remember
Hmm.
thinking, oh, after big moves, I'd say, I just want to go home. And I realized that it wasn't one particular place, it was a feeling for me.
Hmm.
And so I think at this point in my life, I have been able to pull together those pieces and be like, this home is kind of a lot of little puzzle pieces from lots of different places.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah,
Well, yeah, you threw a couple words that, some people may not be familiar with. In particular, you mentioned
sure.
monoculturals and adult TCKs.
Yeah,
Would you mind saying
yeah,
what those mean?
sure. Yeah. So, monoculturals is anyone who has lived in one culture their whole life, which is awesome. And I love getting to talk to monoculturals and hear about their experiences, because it's so fascinating to me as a TCK who grew up in lots of different places, what that experience could be like. And then adult third culture kids, or adult TCKs, is anyone who spent a significant amount of their developmental years in their childhood growing up overseas, but now they're an adult
Hmm.
and maybe they're living back in their passport country, or maybe they're living anywhere in the world, but they were changed because of those experiences growing up.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yes, you mentioned, home being a feeling of peace. Um, yeah,
Mhm.
would you be willing to tell me a little bit about some of the places that you grew up, where you've lived, and yeah, just a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah. So I was born in Singapore. My parents had already been overseas for a couple years at that point, and we were there until I was about 3. So I don't remember too much of Singapore.
Hmm.
There's some like random little bits. Like I remember bars on the windows because lived in sky
Yep.
rises, and I remember hiding in the washing machine because that's where I like to hide as a little 3-year-old. Um, but other than that, I don't remember much. And then we moved to England, and we were there on and off for 6 years. We had
Okay.
1 year that we came back to the States for some medical leave, and then we went back, and then we were in Turkey, Istanbul, for 4 years, and that was like middle school years, like 10 to 14, so they were pretty impactful years. Then we went back to England
Okay.
for a few years, and then I went to boarding school in Germany at a school called Black Forest Academy for my high school years.
Okay.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's a lot of moving, especially yeah,
Yeah.
with that young.
Yeah.
Yeah, would you be able to tell me a little bit about, not you don't need to do every single transition, or you could, that's up to you, but
Totally.
what was that kind of
Mhm.
like, moving to England and then away and then back to,
Mhm.
um, and Istanbul and England,
Yeah.
I could imagine are very different. So, and Singapore.
Yes.
So, Yeah.
Oh man. Yeah, yeah, I think the move specifically from England to Istanbul and then back to England, those two were probably the most impactful because they are just like vastly different
Yeah.
cultures. And so I have always related more to British culture, which kind of makes sense when I think about it. I'm like, I lived there essentially 10
Right.
years, just it was broken up into different pieces. And so yeah, yeah, I think that transition was really hard, especially because, man, yeah, just the cultures are so vastly
Yeah.
different. England is definitely more of a cold culture where they're more direct,
Hmm.
and that is something that I as an adult lean into more. That
Yeah.
I realize I'm a lot more direct. I'm not always the greatest at picking up on social cues. I'm like, now let's just talk about
Yeah.
it. Um, but whereas Istanbul was a lot more of like, no, you're going to be indirect in your communication and kind of like have to kind of figure out what people are thinking by their social
Yeah.
cues. I think something that was hard for me as a young female too was moving to a culture that was a lot more, uh, what would the word be? I guess just not as comfortable
Hmm.
for being a young
Yeah.
girl. There was a lot more, okay, needing to wear a lot more layers and
Yeah.
cover up and not always feeling as safe. And that was a really big piece of the transition for
Hmm.
me in that age. So
Yeah, because
yeah.
how old were you when you were in Istanbul?
Yeah, I was 10, and so that was a pretty big age to be at that point, especially like I mean we think about middle schoolers,
Yeah.
right? And that's really the point when you're suddenly like very self-conscious about everything you're saying and doing anyway.
Yeah.
And so being at this point of, oh my goodness, I don't even understand what is going on around me. And from England, I mean, I will always say yes, English people speak English, but there's a language of its
Yeah.
own. But moving to Istanbul, I mean, could not understand anything. It was a new language,
Right.
and so that played into that too. But
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, you talked about, England or British culture being a little bit more of a cold culture or, relating to that. Um,
Hmm.
yeah. Could you tell me a little bit about British culture, the parts that you liked and related to, or maybe some parts that you didn't, and yeah, how that's impacted
Yeah.
you today?
Oh man. Yeah. So like I said, direct communication. That is it's funny. So I was thinking about this before coming on the podcast. I have this horrible story of how
Oh
I
no.
in college just really put my foot in my mouth because I'm so much more direct.
Hmm.
And it's yeah, it's a bummer of a story. But basically basically I was talking to someone and had asked them if they wanted to come to an event at college with
Mm-hmm.
me, and they were from the South,
Right.
which the South is not as direct as other places in the
Yeah.
US. And so they were like, no, like I have some things to do, and the things that they needed to do really felt like excuses
Right.
because they wouldn't have taken that long. And I remember being like, oh, like I mean, I can wait for you if you want because I'm used to direct communication.
Right.
So I was just like, oh, wait. And she was like, oh, I have some other things I need to do. And I just was like, listen, like, you can tell me if you don't want to come. That's totally fine. And she was like, no, that'd be mean. And I'm like, but now you've wasted my time too. and,
Oh
I,
my. Okay.
and I'm like, Jessica, oh my gosh. I look back at that and I feel so bad because I'm like, that was
Oh my
awful.
goodness.
But 18-year-old Jessi trying to figure out American culture and Southern culture did not know how
Well,
to handle that. But that was like what I was used to growing up. I
yeah.
mean, going to British public school, I would have people very literally be like, "No, I don't want to eat lunch with you. I don't like you." And I'd be like, "Okay, well, I know where I stand with you, so that's
That's that.
that's good, I guess. Yeah.
Wow.
And so it was very confusing in college in the US to be like, oh, now I have to like read people's signs and I don't know what's going on.
Hmm.
Um, so that was different. I also, one of the things that I think I noticed one of the biggest impacts when I moved back to the States for college was talking about government was really hard for me
Hmm.
because in England, there's a lot of reverence
Yeah.
and a lot of just respect for the monarchy.
Hmm.
And I mean, the Queen was a very important figure in my childhood. Like, I fully bawled when she
Yeah.
passed. Like, that was a hard day for me and my
Hmm.
family. Um, but when I moved to the States, there was constantly jokes cracked about the
Yeah.
president. That at first I was like, how dare you? Like, this is your leader. Like, why would you say
Yeah.
that? And that was definitely a difference for me
Yeah.
that I was trying to figure out um, from the difference between British culture. I think also with Turkish culture, the thing that I have always just had so much respect for is the incredible amount of hospitality
Hmm.
that Turks had towards even us as yabancı or like
Yeah.
foreigners was what like we were called on the
Yeah.
street, that they, if we were doing something that probably culturally we shouldn't have, there would usually be Turkish women coming out being like, no, 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 don't do that, you're in a dangerous part of
Hmm.
the town, or like
Yeah.
you need to come over here, and like trying to help us, or even just like inviting us over for tea for like 6 hours. And I'm not
Yeah.
exaggerating, right? Like
Yep.
it was fully all day.
Yeah.
And that's something that I have always had so much respect for, and just really that I think has impacted me as an adult, of wanting to be able to offer that kind of hospitality to people and just show them that kind of love.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's awesome.
Mm,
Yeah.
mm,
Yeah. Yeah. What are yeah, and so growing up in England and then Istanbul,
mhm,
you mentioned
mhm.
going over to people's houses for tea. It's kind
Yep.
of a fun question, but tea, at least from what I've heard, is
Oh,
kind of big in England. It's also very
yes.
big
Oh
in
man.
Turkish culture. So what
Oh yeah.
how do you feel about tea in Turkey versus
uh,
England?
yeah. Oh dude, I love tea. I drink it every single night. I start my day with coffee and then I end my day with tea.
That's awesome.
So there are definitely teas that I'm like, oh, these are better. These are better teas, but I can't get them in America, or they're like really expensive, at least to
Hmm.
get in
Yeah.
America. Um, So it's funny though, when I was a kid, I didn't love tea that much.
Okay.
So it's actually more developed as an adult. And I think it was an aspect of wanting to bring those cultures
Yeah.
in. Now that I'm not there, being like, oh, I miss that place. I want to enjoy something from there. And so
Yeah.
just really like trying a lot of teas and being like, okay, like I have some Turkish tea in my cupboard and I do have some English tea, and those are special for special
Yeah.
times. Um, but yeah, great
Yeah.
question. I love talking about
Yeah.
tea.
I was wondering. Yeah, and I'm actually curious because my mom really likes British culture and all of that. And she drinks her
Wise
yep,
woman.
very much. And she drinks her tea, her Earl Grey with cream and sugar. Which is very different
Hmm.
from
Oh,
Azerbaijani tea. So are you a cream and sugar or sugar? And
yeah.
I know in
Oh,
Azerbaijan, what people will
yeah.
do is they'll put the sugar cube between their teeth and then drink the tea through it. So I don't know
Really?
if that's just an Azerbaijani thing or a Turkish thing too.
Whoa. Okay, I've
You've
not
not
seen that
okay.
before.
I was
That's
wondering. Yeah.
I okay, I'm gonna have to try that now.
Okay.
Like that's like okay,
Yeah.
I'll have to try that out. That's so cool. Yeah, so I think it depends on the tea that I'm drinking
Right.
for sure. Like in Turkey, I mean, there's a whole different Turkish tea kettle.
Right.
Like it looks
Yeah.
different. It's like It's like a double decker. That's what I call it, a double decker tea
Sounds
kettle,
very
which I
British
enjoy.
of you.
Uh, I know. That's how I blend them,
Right.
right? That's how I make them all work together. Uh, but oh man, yeah. So early on when I was drinking tea, I would definitely drink it with milk and sugar. And specifically, my favorite brand is PG Tips Black Tea.
Okay.
It's phenomenal. Yeah, if you ever get the chance, you should try it. But I can no longer drink dairy, and
Oh,
so I don't know what it is, but like the alternative milks don't taste the same in PG
yeah.
Tips, and so I don't do it as much. So I've weaned back from that. I still do some
Yeah.
sugar, but oh man, yeah,
Awesome.
love some tea.
That's great. Yeah, I want to jump back a little bit because you're talking about going to British public school. And so I wanted to ask, yeah, what was
Hmm.
that like? You know, you mentioned kids being like, I don't want to sit next to you. I don't
Yeah,
like you. So what was it like going to British school?
yeah, yeah. Oh, so British public school, very honestly, was probably one of the hardest experiences growing up overseas for
Yeah.
me. Um, they, how I've explained it to people is that in school there's almost like a food chain. There's like a hierarchy of people and who is considered popular, who's not, and like just on that scale, right? And Americans are the bottom,
Hmm.
like absolutely in British public school. So
Can
I
I,
was,
yeah, can I ask
yeah,
why that is?
yeah.
Or, yeah.
I'm sure some of it is culturally systemic from the aspect that we Americans decided to leave England.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, but I think there's an aspect of, and it even goes back to what I was saying about reverence towards the government and kind of respect in how Brits hold
Yeah.
themselves. Americans are just quite different and a little bit more loud and boisterous,
Hmm.
and what Brits would probably say is very embarrassing,
Yeah.
and yeah, just along those lines. And so, and really, a lot of Brits think that Americans are quite rude,
Hmm.
also, and so there's just quite a bit of prejudice
Okay.
there.
Yeah.
And so going to British public school, it was like, okay, so Jessie is the American, stay away from
Okay.
her kind of
Yeah.
thing. Um, so the friends that I did make were the kids who were considered also low on the food chain.
Hmm.
And the cool thing about that was they were very empathetic
Yeah.
people because they understood what it was like to be bullied and to not be cared for well by
Yeah.
others. Um, they weren't necessarily people that like we had a lot in common, to be honest.
Yeah.
Um, but it was really cool to get to know them. I think just how British public school is run was very, very hard for me.
Hmm.
There's a yeah, there's a lot of how do I word this? There's a fair amount of teachers humiliating students to make them perform well.
Gotcha.
And to be honest, it doesn't really work. Like a lot of students in the schools were really disrespectful towards teachers, um, at least from my perspective. And so that was an interesting thing to navigate.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, yeah, I have a question about that because that's very interesting. Because growing up in
Mhm.
Azerbaijan, it could be described
Mm,
as a honor shame culture, and in public school, there was a
uh,
lot of humiliation with teachers. Especially against
mhm,
poor performing students or misbehaving students. And I guess I've
mhm,
never thought. I mean, I've never thought of Britain as an honor shame culture, but would you describe it as
mhm.
such, or why is there the teacher humiliation that you kind of just described?
It's interesting. I don't know that I've ever even thought of it that way either. I
Yeah,
don't know that I would necessarily put it in the honor shame culture. It's funny looking back at things. I don't know if you feel this way sometimes as well, but sometimes talking about my experiences because they're through a lens of childhood
right.
too. I'm like, maybe there's pieces of this that like either I'm misremembering or different things like that. Like when I talk about England to others, I'm like, does it sound like I didn't live there?
Yeah.
Because I don't understand how certain things worked,
Hmm.
and it was because I didn't I didn't understand how they work because I was a
Yeah.
kid. And so I don't know. That's a great question. That I don't know that I have an answer to.
Yeah. No, yeah. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, but yeah,
Mhm.
you're talking about school and um just kind of your
Mhm.
experiences there, and the friends that you made, and empathizing with them, and
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. So it was a really hard time. I went to a couple different British public schools, three
okay.
three different ones over different times, and the one that I went to that was essentially like eighth grade in the U.S. Um, that was probably the hardest, and I think it was just that the age that I was at too.
Yeah.
Um, but that season of life for British kids is very much relationship based too.
Hmm.
So our school, I went to an all girls school.
Okay.
There was 1,500 of
Yeah.
us, and we got out 5 minutes after the boys' school across the street got out, so that the boys could line up and wait for all their girlfriends to walk them home, which was always a little uncomfortable because I had to walk past all of them to get home. I really hated that.
I feel like that's
Um,
kind of intimidating as a eighth grader walking out to
yes.
a line of boys that are waiting for you.
It was awful. It was not fun.
Oh my
And for
gosh.
me, I had not dated anyone up until that
Yeah.
point, which my friends thought was insane. Like they were like, "You're 14 and you haven't had a serious
Oh my
boyfriend," which
gosh.
now I'm like, yeah, that's not weird,
Yeah,
but like
no.
there it was. And
Interesting.
so they even would get to the point there where they're like, listen, we'll line up some guys for you and you can pick one. I was like, no, no,
Oh my
I really
goodness.
don't want that. Please,
Wow.
please don't do that. But it was talked about all day, every day
Yeah.
at school. And really we were taught in school by that age in health class, like it is healthy to be having sex at least once a week.
This is at
And you
14?
should be doing that.
Wow.
This is at
Yeah.
14. We were given everything we needed. We were sent letters in the mail by the government to be like, here's where you can go to the clinic and not tell your parents about
Oh,
it.
wow.
And yeah, and it was just that was quite shocking for me because I had come from a very small international school
Okay. Yeah.
that was a Christian school to be
Yeah.
also, so it was quite drastically different.
Hmm.
And so that also was, yeah, just a lot.
Hmm.
Um, and I ended up not staying at that school too long
Yeah.
because really I went into depression. I was just struggling to get through,
Yeah.
and I am grateful for that season of my life because it impacted who I am a lot. And for me, I'm a Christian, and so
Yeah.
that was the season where my faith grew a lot.
Hmm.
But I'm also glad I didn't stay all that long.
Yeah. Yeah. No, yeah, at
Yeah.
14. Yeah, that seems like a lot to be going to. And yeah, you talked
Mhm.
about that season of being in that school and struggling with depression and that impacting you
Yeah.
today. How would you say that that's impacted you positively or negatively?
Mm. Yeah, I mean, I think one of the biggest things is understanding depression really well
Yeah.
and being able to not only understand myself and my depression, because I've struggled with depression since I was 10,
Yeah.
um, and being able to work through that but also being able to understand other people in that season of life.
Yeah.
That is a lesson I'm grateful to have, because I want to love people in my life really well,
Hmm.
and I know how real that struggle can be and how it can look different for different people. And so that is something that I would say, like, to my core,
Yeah.
like that impacted who I am. And that is probably the biggest takeaway that I would have from that.
Yeah. No. Yeah, that's
Mhm.
awesome. Yeah. Yeah. And so, yeah, I just have a follow-up question on that. I mean, yeah, impacting you to your core, and then, yeah, knowing, going through that experience, and then learning and understanding how to love people well, when
Mm.
they're struggling with depression or something else.
Mhm.
What,
Yeah.
yeah, how, I mean, each person experiences that differently, right? But
Yeah.
what is like a one big takeaway or two, for, yeah, how you have come to love people that are struggling with depression, and what you
Mm.
found to be the most
Yeah.
impactful?
Mhm. Yeah. And man, I didn't say this earlier,
Yeah.
but for me as an adult, I it was actually around that age, 14, that I realized as well how few resources there were for third culture kids
Yeah.
specifically, struggling with those kinds of things. And that was at the point that I knew, okay, I want to be a part of changing that
Hmm.
as an adult and being able to support third culture kids going through seasons of life like that.
Hmm.
And so I now I work at a company where I get to do that every day, which is incredible. And we make workshops on, like, how to work through your anxiety as an adult TCK and how to understand your depression, which is such a huge joy to be able to offer that.
Yeah.
And I think the biggest thing that I needed as a kid in that season was someone to just say, I see you. You're not like, you're not broken
Yeah.
beyond repair. Like, and I'm here with you. I don't need to fix you. I just am here with you.
Hmm.
And really getting into that hole with me.
Yeah.
And so that is my, like, life's vision,
Hmm.
is to just be able to be that person for other TCKs who are going through that,
Yeah.
because I know a lot of them feel like they're not seen, and also like they have to hide it.
Yeah.
I think the shame that comes with those kinds of struggles drives me up a wall. Like, I wish it wasn't a thing that we had to struggle
Yeah.
with. And I've found being the first person to say, like, hey, are you struggling with this? If you are, I'm here for you. Like, has yeah, it's a joy to be able to help people, as much as, like, I don't want anyone to be in that. I want to be able to be what I didn't have as a kid for someone else.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's really cool. Yeah, yeah, you talked about, at 14, going through that experience, kind of really putting this drive in you to be someone that you said is someone that gets in the hole with other TCKs when they're kind of experiencing that. Yeah, could you tell me a little bit about how you ended up where you're at, and who you're working for, and kind of what you're doing?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I was 14, there really wasn't a, like, TCK care field. Like, that didn't exist at that point. And so at that point, I was thinking, man, I'm gonna have to do this. I'm gonna have to like, I'm gonna have to start this, which thankfully it was not the case.
Yeah.
I just didn't know about some of the resources that were available. So I went off to college and got a degree in psychology, my undergrad,
Hmm.
and then I got a master's degree in counseling. And so my thought had always been, okay, I don't know where this is going to start, but I think these things will help me be able to love TCKs well and come from that
Yeah.
perspective. And so while I was getting my master's degree, I needed to get an internship. And so that was right around the time that TCK Training, the company that I work at now, was really starting up.
Okay.
And so I had cold emailed the CEO, Warren Wells, and I said, hey, I need an internship and I love what you're doing. I would love to be able to just shadow you and see what's going
Yeah.
on. And about 6 months later, she was just like, you know what? Do you want to just come on the team and be our director of adult TCK services? And I was like, oh my gosh, this is my dream job. Yes, of course. And so that was kind of how I got there. And a lot of my department is just creating resources for adult TCKs and teens as well, because we know that they're about to shift into being adult TCKs. And so we do things like unstacking sessions, which is really processing the griefs of
Yeah.
hardships from childhood. And that has really been the counseling background has helped a lot. Like while what we do at TCK training is coaching, the things that I learned through my degree of how to listen to people well really dictates that and undergirds it. And then being able to just, yeah, create content for workshops or retreats or things like that has been really, really great.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah.
Hmm.
Earlier you mentioned a TCK care field and how feeling like that didn't
Hmm.
exist when you were a kid. Could you tell me what that
Hmm.
is and what that looks like?
Yeah. Yeah. So when I was a kid, I did not know that anyone anywhere had written anything about TCKs. I was like, oh, we're just this weird group of people that probably, I don't know. I was told by a lot of friends and a lot of people on the field, anytime I brought up, hey, I think this is a struggle because of the experiences we've had, I was pretty much shot down and told to stop talking about it and
Hmm.
that I was complaining. And so for a long time, I was like, oh my gosh, is this true? And then really processing it and be like, no, that's not true. There are issues.
Yeah.
And I would like people to be aware of
Yeah.
them. And so when I got into college, when I started looking into what is out there, I found certain companies that were doing these things, mostly ministries, because that's where they've been able to help missions organizations. But then there are other companies doing some things also for those who don't come from a faith based background. And then finding books and things that were written that I was like, what? These exist? This is amazing. And really feeling like I got to open this treasure trove of resources, even though I'll say now we need so many more.
Yeah.
There's so much need, and there's uh, but really being able to learn about that, and I started volunteering at different companies to be able to see what kind of resources they had and how they were supporting TCKs, and just seeing, wow, this is actually a field. Like this is a work field that people are
Yeah.
doing, and I get to come into this rather than start from the ground up, which I was really happy about.
That's
I
awesome.
did not want to be that trailblazer. That would have been that would have been hard for me.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. You talked about training missions organizations and then trying to expand to others that
Hmm.
aren't faith based,
Hmm.
and coming into an
Yep.
existing field, where people had
Hmm.
already done some work. And so what, when you came in, what were some of the things that you saw were there that made you really happy and that were
Hmm.
good? And what are some of the things that you saw were maybe lacking and where we needed more resources and more
Mm,
stuff?
yeah. Yeah. Um, yeah, I will say I think as a whole there are a lot more resources for missions organizations and kids who have grown up in missions.
Yeah.
There's still a need for more, but because families are sent in a certain way, it is kind of this duty essentially for missions organizations to care for those families while they're overseas.
Right.
And that's something in the last decade I've seen grow significantly, which is exciting. but there are so few resources for TCKs who did not grow up in a faith-based
Yeah.
background as well, like military and diplomatic services and all of that, and business.
Yeah.
And that is so important.
Yeah.
Like, I want everyone to be seen. And so, and I will say also the adult TCK side of it is really lacking too,
Hmm.
where unfortunately most of the programs that get started, it's hard for them to continue going because sometimes adult TCKs as adult TCKs, sometimes it is hard for us to acknowledge that this was a part of it, or it might have even just been so
Yeah.
painful that we don't want to go back and dig up all of that. And so I completely understand
Right.
that. But yeah, I've been blown away by the the range of people who have come for adult TCK
Yeah.
services at the company that I work at. I mean, between ages 18 and 70,
Yeah.
who are like, oh my gosh, this is the first person who is saying something where I feel like you actually understand the struggle that I've had for the last 40 years.
Hmm.
And oh man, like
Yeah.
I yeah, I want to be able to support all those people and be able to provide that. I think in general, it's just there's so much need, and there's so many places to go with that, of both creating resources that see people in the hard and encourage them in the hope and the good of the strengths that come through the TCK experience,
Yeah.
but that it can be hard for us to kind of access those strengths if the grief is in the way.
Hmm.
And really being able to help people process that and be like, you are seen in this hardship, and I want to help you be able to notice your strength.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. Yeah, you mentioned some of the resources that missions organizations do have, and some of the stuff
Mhm.
that you guys are providing, or
Mhm.
training organizations for. Could you tell me what some of those
Mhm.
resources look like?
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of what we do is training those organizations on how to support their TCKs well, because many of them have, whether it's a full team or just one person, if the organization is small, someone that is their
Yeah.
role is to support the TCKs on the field. And so we do a lot of training on like how to debrief families and like really get into the hard and help kids understand and have an emotional vocabulary and really see what we call the ampersand of the TCK experience, of the good and the hard.
Hmm.
Um, so that really training them on how to see those kids well. We create a lot of curriculum and things like that to also help families in that connection. We do a lot of parent training because we know that is those are the people who have the most impact on their kids, because they're the ones who are consistent, is the parents. And so we want them to be able to have the tools to know how to support well, um, in ways that can meet the needs of their TCKs. And historically, what I have seen is they just didn't know.
Yeah.
That a lot of these parents are going overseas not knowing that they are now raising a child that is a completely different culture than their own,
Yeah.
and has a unique set of challenges that they were not aware were even going to be a part of this. And trying to be able to say like, hey, here, let's talk about it, let's raise awareness of what that looks like and how you can meet your kids' needs. So what we do is a lot of training. And then, like I said, for adult TCKs, we have things like unstacking sessions or retreats. But yeah, for the organizations, it's a lot of training and then creating curriculum or things that those people can then take
Yeah.
and support kids while they're overseas. So,
Yeah. Yeah, and those, yeah, speaking of adult TCK services and unstacking and retreats, that's actually where I
Hmm.
met you, was at one of your
Yeah,
unstacking retreats,
it was
which was
awesome.
awesome. It was
Hmm.
great and hugely beneficial to me. Um,
Mm.
but some people may not know what this idea of unstacking, that was
Yeah.
incredibly helpful for me. But yeah, could
Hmm.
you tell me a little bit about
Yeah.
unstacking and just some more of the adult TCK services?
Yeah. Yeah. So unstacking, it's a concept that our CEO Lauren Wells actually came up with. Is she talks about yeah, so unstacking comes from this model that our CEO came up with called the Grief Tower.
Hmm.
And she has two books written on it. The Grief Tower it's just called the Grief Tower, and that is for parents or caregivers helping younger TCKs process their hardships, and then Unstacking Your Grief Tower, which is written for adult TCKs processing. But essentially, the concept is the hard things that we experience, if we don't process them, they stack on top of each other, and eventually that tower is going to
Yeah,
collapse if we don't take each block down and process it. And for TCKs, on average, they do experience more trauma and more grief and loss than someone who did not grow up moving around. And so what we do in our unstacking sessions and our processing retreat is really come alongside each adult TCK or teen TCK and map that out. So we do a grief tower timeline where we write that out and say like, okay, what are the hard things that happen? Let's talk about them.
yeah,
And even if you're not necessarily ready to talk about certain ones, okay, that's totally fine. We can table that for now, but like let's provide space for you to process
yeah.
this. Whether it is talking to someone or using a different processing tool like going on a run. I will say for me, my my how I process, I call it car scream singing,
Okay.
where when I have to process, yep, I go and I get in my car. It's especially great if I have a road trip coming up, and I will blast the music and I will scream along to it.
That's
And
awesome.
it is how, yeah, and I have a list of questions that I think through as I'm doing that, and I'll be like, okay, so today I'm going to process this block on my grief tower, and I'm going to think through these questions while I listen to this random music and scream along. um, that is one of the ways that I do
What
that.
is your go-to scream along song?
Oh man, no, this is kind of embarrassing. It's life. It's Life is a Highway from the Cars movie. By Rascal
Yep.
Flatts. And so I'll just like I'll loop
Okay.
that in my car. I'm sure I've actually there was one time I was doing this after a TCK camp and I was caravanning with people. So I was alone in my car, but they were in the car in front of me and we were at a stoplight and they called me because they were like, what's going on? Are you okay? Like you look a little crazy, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm just processing, it's fine.
Oh my
And they
goodness.
were like, okay.
All right.
um yeah. I was like, all right, get off, I gotta listen to Rascal Flatts again.
Oh, that's fun.
um but yeah, all like there's lots of different ways that people process, like
Yeah.
some people it's like cooking or doing puzzles or things like that. And so we actually have a resource on our website of free processing
Hmm.
questions for people to be able to just download and use whenever they are processing a block. And they kind of walk through different things like what made that feel so hard? Where did you feel that in your body?
Yeah.
Like, kind of to get you thinking about how it impacted you both in your childhood and where you are at today, and what you want to take from that experience and what you want to leave behind.
Yeah.
So,
No, that's
yeah.
awesome. Yeah, I want to jump back just for a brief moment to kind of your personal story of transition,
Mm-hmm.
and coming
Mm.
back here to college, and then eventually, finding TCK services, um,
Mm-hmm.
and joining them. But yeah, I just want to ask, yeah, how have you kind of integrated your TCK experience, of Singapore, England, and Turkey, and
Mm-hmm.
kind of how you live your life today and kind of what you do. I mean, I know you mentioned loving tea and, the struggles you went
Mm.
through really pushing you towards serving and helping TCKs, but just on your
Mm-hmm.
day-to-day basis and just kind of how you think about things maybe, or yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, well, listeners won't be able to see this, but you can see that I have a map behind
Yeah,
me. I have a lot of maps in my
yeah.
house, so I love that. I have a lot of little things from around the world. I have those Starbucks
Yep.
mugs from like all of the places.
Yeah.
Those make me so
Hmm.
happy. I love to introduce friends to different ideas of culture,
Yeah.
especially food. Like I feel like that can be like an easy way to be like, hey, I want you to kind of see what this is like. And so my friends know they're like, yeah, you're really good at finding like hole in the wall, like
Yeah.
international food. And I'm like, oh yeah, that's my jam. Um, I one of the things I enjoy doing too every year is whatever friends I am near at Christmas time, I do Christmas
Yeah.
crackers from England, which are those like long tubes. And so um, I enjoy doing that and just being able
Yeah.
to show people what that's like. But I think there's a lot of just it's it's interesting too because there's probably a lot of things I'm not even aware
Yeah.
of that are like they add up in the way that I look at the world and the way that I talk to
Yeah.
people. And it and it's always more evident when I'm talking to a group of people who have not moved around, where they're like, "Oh, that was an interesting thing to say," and I'm like, "Oh,
Was
okay,
it?
good to
Okay.
know."
All right.
All right.
Yeah.
um, uh, but yeah, those are kind of some of the ways I've brought those things
Yeah.
in. I think that I would I would have a hard time. I know some TCKs, this is how they coped with repatriation or like moving back to their passport country, was needing to take a season of not being seen as a
Yeah.
TCK and being able to just be them.
Hmm.
And that I fully understand that, like being able to take take a take a time away from it to then process who they are maybe outside of
Yeah.
that. But I do think that it's impacted a lot of who we are. And for me, I was never going to be that person. I needed to be able to embrace it. And sometimes I probably clung too hard to it,
Hmm.
to be
Yeah.
honest. And that's something I had to work through a lot. But there are like random words that I've always been like, I am always going to say this. Like I say the
Yeah.
cinema when I'm going to go see a movie. I don't say the
Yeah.
theater. I like to say advertisement and
Yep.
aluminium, and people look at me weird, and I'm like, "Yep, better handle it. It's gonna happen."
Yeah.
Um, but
Yeah.
yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, Jessi, thanks for being on the podcast.
Hmm.
Two questions before we
Thanks for
close
having
out.
me.
But what is your favorite worn shoe? the sh-
Wait,
what is your
what?
favorite shoe? The shoe that you've worn the most,
Oh,
that you like to travel in, or that
oh,
you enjoy walking around in?
ooh. So my closet would probably say my
Uh
Tevas,
huh.
which are like those sandals. They're kind of like Chacos, but I like them better than
Yep.
Chacos. I'm gonna be honest. Um, they are they're in rough shape. I
You
need
need new
I need to
Tevas.
get another pair. I need a new pair. Yeah, but they last a really long time, which I love
Yeah.
that. But also, uh, they are my favorite camp shoe whenever I'm working a TCK camp.
Awesome.
I love
Yeah.
them. They're just and like they're good with like water activities too. Like
Yeah.
kayaking, whatever. So those are my favorite worn shoes.
That awesome. Yeah. And is there anything that you would like to shout out or say
Mm.
as we're closing up?
Yes, yeah. So at TCK Training, we are currently doing a survey on TCKs, adult third culture kids specifically, and the experiences they had in childhood, because it's kind of twofold in doing this research, is that we want to be able to understand how TCKs have been cared for and what we can do better But also what we've heard from a lot of adult TCKs is like, thank you for doing this because it gives me a space to talk about my
Mm.
stories, which is similar to what you're doing here, which I
Yeah.
love. And so if anyone is listening to this, we would really appreciate you taking that survey because it helps us understand your story better. We want you represented in that research. And so we're going to be doing that for the next probably 6 months and then start doing data crunching. And so that survey should be open until about May 2024.
Awesome. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And are you guys doing another adult TCK retreat? Is that coming up?
So, yeah, so this next year, we've actually decided to do it virtually this next year because we had a fair amount of people all over the world say, hey, we want to come, but we can't get to Georgia in the
Fair enough.
US. And so, yeah, so we've decided for 2024, which we're going to be doing it in June, and registration will be open in February 2024. That we're going to be doing it virtually, and I'm really excited about that, to be able to support people in lots of different places. And yeah, it'll be
Yeah.
great.
Yeah. And I just want to say that the ATCK unstacking retreat, I was a guinea pig on the first one. And it was awesome. Jessi and Lauren
Mhm.
Wells were there and went through the unstacking process, and they kind of helped a couple of us through that, and hugely beneficial to me. So I recommend
Thanks.
signing up for that if anyone's listening that
It,
feels like they need that.
awesome.
Sweet.
Yeah, it was great.
Yeah.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Jessi, thanks for being on the podcast, and I hope you have a good rest of your day. Hey guys, thanks for listening to this episode with Jessi. I hope that you enjoyed our conversation. You'll find all the links to TCK training and the adult TCK survey that was mentioned during the episode in the episode description, as well as on Instagram and Facebook. If you enjoyed this episode, I would encourage you to go like, follow, and share it on whatever platform you're listening to it on. Please go and check out our Instagram and Facebook page. That's where I'll post updates regularly about what's coming next and what you guys can look forward to. Next episode will come out the end of April, so be sure to check that out. And again, thank you all for your continued support, and tune in next time at the Worn Shoes Podcast.